Dr. Ashenden, thanks for coming on the Johnny Vedmore Show. How are you today?
Bonjour, Johnny. Je parle français, c'est vrai. I'm well. How are you doing?
Ah, excellent, monsieur, excellent. J'ai habité à Lyon pour un petit peu de temps, mais c'était un long temps avant.
Oh,
So let's not confuse the people listening
formidable.
at home. But I could sing you a little bit of George Brassens if you want sometime, but
C'est
we'll do that
génial.
after the show.
Excellent.
So historically, the Catholic Church has had an issue with the definition of truth, and on occasion, the Church has systematically persecuted those who spread the truth. What's your stance on truth in the modern world? Should people be allowed to question any narrative?
Oh, Johnny. So first of all, to answer backwards, absolutely, we have to question everything. But secondly, your introduction wasn't quite right. It's precisely because the Catholic Church has been the guardian of truth that it's tried immensely hard to separate truth from error. And so, I mean, the Inquisition, for example, was an attempt to try and get to the bottom of things, to get to the truth. Unfortunately, inevitably, when religion and politics get entwined, they're bad for each other. But the fact is, we are meaning-seeking creatures. We depend upon the truth, or else we go mad, or we get bamboozled. Anything that helps us get to the truth is important. As it happens, one of the reasons I became a Catholic is because I can't find any other philosophy that's willing to fight for the truth and has fought for the truth through the different cultures as the Catholic Church does. There are no political parties. We don't have any philosophical movements helping us. Most people are willing to look for the truth insofar as it's convenient for themselves, but we need something bigger than that.
Yes, we do. That's a really good answer. And thank you for being honest with me. We always like a bit of honesty. My chat will like it too. I'm sure they'll ask you a question or two within the next 10 minutes or so. With accusations of two-tier policing and sentencing in the UK, you've written a piece about two-tier Catholicism. Can you tell us what you mean by that term?
Yeah, so in the last 60 years, we've been faced by two really serious movements that are against the truth. One's communism and the other was fascism or Nazism. We dealt with fascism and Nazism fairly emphatically. There's no real nationalistic Nazism around anymore, apart from perhaps maybe the west of Ukraine, but nothing to speak of. However, communism is alive and well and working very hard to subvert our democracy and our freedom of thought. And so what we call politically correct thinking or cultural Marxism has been working away insidiously at the institutions, absolutely all of them, including the Catholic Church. And the way the Catholic Church has given way to it has been by getting involved with left-wing political movements as if they are the way to freedom and happiness, but they're not. And so one of the things I was doing was complaining about Catholics who've been really quite right on politically. But the moment the pendulum swings, so now we've got an establishment that's really quite hard left, it's punishing anything right of center. I'm expecting the Catholic Church committed to the truth to say so, just to be as critical on the right, critical on the left as on the right. And it isn't being. So I'm kind of making a wake-up call internally to the Catholics to say that if we're going to have any credibility in the political world, where we've got to call out left-wing totalitarianism as it's trying to steal our freedom of speech and criminalize us for freedom of thought, then we've got to get our own house in order first. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, there's a question already come from the chat, which I find interesting, and I may expand on it slightly. Holly, who is a brilliant member of the chat community, has said, how long before the globalists really go for the Church of England? And I'd like your opinion on this, because, of course, I've done a lot of research, and I've gone through all of the training slides from the World Economic Forum, where they train their own people. And, of course, they have this idea of creating the one church, uniting the Catholic, the Church of Islam, Church of Judaism, and Church of Catholicism or Christianity, all together under one roof. How do you feel about that? And do you think that the globalists are really after destroying the church?
Well, first of all, to answer the Church of England point, first of all, they got it about 25 years ago. I mean, that's when they had their people in place. And over the last 25 years, they've kept out any critical voices. So what we have is a bunch of clones in management positions or bishops So the Church of England has been completely asphyxiated. You won't hear it saying anything authentically Christian, apart from a few noble individuals. But institutionally, it's gone. In terms of globalism, I'm very much against conspiracy theories because I have a lot of trouble staying sane, and my own mental equilibrium doesn't come easily. And so the problem with conspiracy theories is they upset the balance of one's mind a bit. But it's perfectly clear there are people running the world, the institution, the West, behind the scenes, financially, politically. We don't seem to have a president of the United States at the moment, and no one seems to care very much about it. And you're right, it's again, there's no obvious manifesto, I suppose, apart from Klaus Schwarz, but yes, there's an attempt to produce some kind of relativistic everything, including taming religion. And I mean, again, that's another reason for being a Catholic, because the Catholic religion has refused to be tamed for 2,000 years. It's had its up points and its down points, but essentially it's stayed in the ring fighting all the way. And I just don't see any other organization capable of challenging, however badly it does, however much it gets wounded, however much it gets occasionally corrupted, and everyone gets wounded and has periods of incompetence. I just don't see anything else. There isn't any other movement. I mean, one of the things I was involved with in the 1980s was smuggling Bibles into the Soviet Union, because the communist regime there had the first thing it tried to do was to destroy orthodoxy in Russia and Catholicism in Czechoslovakia and Poland and elsewhere, because it knew perfectly well that only Christianity, and ideally historic Christianity, there's some wonderful Protestant exceptions like Bonhoeffer, only Christianity has the internal guts and integrity and coherence to challenge it. It's always the state against the individual. And the only person capable of speaking up, any movement capable of speaking up for the individual and freedom of thought at the moment is authentic Christianity.
So you talked about conspiracy theory there, but I mean, it's said out loud. It's not just Klaus Schwab. They have actually mapped out the idea of having a unified church between the major religions. And this is an idea. Yeah. So wouldn't that just be a conspiracy once it's not a theory anymore, once they're actually trying to get that to happen?
Yes, that's a good point. I probably haven't caught up with the fact that they've told us what they plan to do, so it's no longer a conspiracy. Technically, you win on points. Absolutely right.
I'm very good at that, because I've been called a conspiracy theorist loads of times for just stating conspiracies that are provable. Yes. So I mean, it makes it hard for people to use the term conspiracy theory, because, of course, I find it's a very blanket. But I do appreciate your response there. Now, I got an extraordinary long question from the chat. I've never asked such a long question, and Joel Allen, 1972, has asked. So pay attention here. We have impact on our destiny, or we have to impact on our destiny by putting down the fault lines of political, cultural, and religious sides, and realize that we all face the same forces of evil, a force that created politics to divert us from seeing the simple truth. 8 billion people, 67 million in the UK, cannot be controlled and enslaved by a comparative handful unless we stand aside and are divided and ruled into allowing it. The demons are now at the door, and it's creaking. Time for backbone, time for balls, time to do what humanity should have done aeons ago. Stand for fairness, justice, and freedom for all people. Yes, even those we disagree with, and accept nothing less. Time to come together in a common cause. If we don't, then a dark, dark age is upon us. What do you say?
Well, first of all, it depends which the common cause is. I'm not going to stand just with anybody. My enemy's enemy is not always my friend. But let's go back to the beginning of 72's argument. 72 was a good year, by the way. I would say, first of all, he's quite right in saying this is essentially a metaphysical struggle between good and evil. It's very difficult to distinguish between good and evil. It's actually one of humanity's most important tasks. And for that, you need discrimination. It's no accident that the whole political correct movement has outlawed discrimination by changing its meaning and by toxifying it. discrimination is the only way we can tell between good and bad and good and evil. So that's our very first task. And it's never easy. It's never easy because evil always masquerades as good. So everything comes out as good, pretending to be good. And we have the task of unraveling it and discovering what's rotten at the center and what isn't. And the more sophisticated evil is, the more difficult it makes it for us. So that's the first task. The second task is that so the demons are indeed at the door. I'm not sure evil created politics. I think I would say that the primary struggle in the human quest is the difference between power and love. So politics is all about power. In that sense, I'll give 72 I'll give him his claim that politics is essentially an instrument of evil. But I think one of the things we need to do is to look at how power and love express themselves in different movements. So, Nietzsche is quite clearly about power. Islam, quite clearly about power. Nazism, about power. Communism, about power. Christianity, about compassionate, sacrificial love. So I'm not going to align myself with people who are given to power because it's too dangerous. What I will do is align myself with anybody who can see that spiritually, philosophically, metaphysically, we're in a power-love antithesis, and who are willing to call out power because it's dangerous. The temptations, as we know in all the novels and everything else, are that you think you can use power for good. Go to Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and see how dangerous the ring was and what Galadriel did with it. One more thing, 8 billion people can't be seduced. It's not true. It depends on, we need to understand human nature better. We need to go to Orwell and Huxley. Orwell told us that people can be imprisoned by fear. Look what the government is doing now, terrifying us from even putting things on Facebook. Huxley told us that we can be seduced by pleasure. Society have been doing for the last 50 years. It's been offering us one drug after another, everything from consumerism to cannabis. So no, people get seduced and controlled. It's an immensely difficult task to remain free from either.
Marta has asked, and this is quite a spicy one. She asks, do you embrace the Jesuit doctrine? Their history is one of despotic destruction. It has nothing to do with the truth. What do you say to that?
Oh well, with all due respect, you can't. That's just so wrong. I mean, it's just completely wrong. The Jesuits were started by Ignatius of Loyola. They were a group of intelligent, dedicated, sacrificial, holy men who came in to bring a deeper truth to the church, to clean the church up. They were church cleaners. They were truth seekers. They were determined to be the very best at what they did. It's true that, like all organizations, they've had periods of going off. They're off at the moment, for example. I mean, the Jesuits have really sold themselves to the spirit of the age in the last 30 years. So I'm not a Jesuit apologist, but I think we have to distinguish between movements that have good periods and bad periods, and essentially ask whether they can be accountable to their higher virtues, or whether we can't save them from the corruption that hits all people and movements. So, we need to be specific. Which Jesuits, which era, what criteria we're using to assess them. What I'd like is for the Jesuits to get their acts together and to become, again, the clever, dedicated, sacrificial truth seekers for authentic Christianity that they began their lives as being.
Well, thank you for that. Now, I do have someone who followed up that question in a sense with which Jesuit we can say, because Dark Commission in the chat says, what future is there for the Catholic Church in the coming New World Order when the current Pope seems to be an open Satanist surrounded by Satanist imagery? Because he is also a Jesuit, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He's one of the worst of them. I said they'd gone off. I agreed. Yes, the current Pope is absolutely dreadful. God bless him. God help him. But the trouble is, if you go back to Jesus's 12 apostles, nearly 20% of them were traitors, Judas. So the current Pope is behaving like Judas. We've got a Judas. Jesus had a Judas. It's no great surprise. They happen. A bit as Confucius said, like detritus. He'll die and he'll be replaced. The really critical issue for the Catholic Church is whether or not we get a freedom fighter for the next Pope. If we do, we're in the game. If we don't, Well, I can't even begin to think about the difficulties of that. In terms of what happens next, there are 1.4 billion Catholics in the world. Do you know that? Do you know the places where the Catholic Church is really on fire? China, in particular, one of the harshest, most dangerous, most despotic regimes. And the reason is because people get to make a contrast between what the state is doing and what the human heart longs for. And so, the fact is, you can't keep the Jesus people down, because what Jesus came to do and to teach, what he came to give human beings, is what we need and long for most of all. The church is a really poor vehicle of this wonderful idea, but Jesus said he'd look after it, and it hasn't collapsed yet. So we just have to make do with the fact that many of us are badly compromised. I'm badly compromised. I'm a very poor Christian, but on the other hand, I'm not going to give up. So the next 50 years, it's going to be about underground Christians against the system. Join the underground.
I truly like the fact that you are willing to answer such questions, especially with a chuckle and a smile, because a lot of these some people would balk at and they would run away from. Now there's another question from the chat, but I'm going to combine it with one of the questions I was going to ask you a little bit later on. So I'll ask you two questions. Sunday Girl has asked, what are your thoughts on Welby, as in Justin Welby? And I was going to ask, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has been accused of blocking a serious case of misconduct. Does the hierarchy of the church still have major issues when it comes to dealing with claims of misconduct? So could you answer both questions?
Yeah, I didn't know what to make of Welby until one day I went to a service at Lambeth Palace, and I sat near the high altar and watched him do his thing. And I watched him snap and lose his temper at his woman chaplain in the middle of it. And she and I were having lunch afterwards. And I said, actually, as it happens, I'm not in favor of women priests, but, you're my sister, you're my colleague. I'm so sorry that man treated you so badly at that moment. And she said, I'm used to it. He always blames other people when he gets things wrong. And from that moment, I knew that Welby had a problem with corruption, and he's got more and more corrupt. I'm so sorry to criticize somebody, to make it ad hominem. We should avoid ad hominem, but he's not very clever intellectually. He's not at all with it spiritually. He appears to have given up on Christianity. He's running a terrible organization. He's just hammered a really good man called Bernard Randall, who's quite a clever, sensible, nice clergyman, whose only crime was to tell the kids in the school he was chaplain in that they had to think for themselves. And Welby threw him to the dogs. He hasn't worked for 5 years. It's beyond disgusting. So I'm sorry, he's a bad man, and all I can do is pray for him, and I'm just really sorry. It's dreadful, but it's just, he's a warning to us all that the corruption, we're all capable of being corrupt. I have a lot of trouble fighting my own internal corruption. I'm still fighting it. I wish, I'm sorry he's given up on it.
Yeah, I understand. I agree with that. Even that we're all fighting our own internal corruption. That is a very good way to put it. We've only got about a minute and a half, couple of minutes left, so I'll ask you a couple of briefer questions, if you could give briefer answers. Just how can the Catholic Church bridge the divide between the establishment and the citizens of the United Kingdom?
I don't think it can. I think these are two separate worlds, two separate languages. In my experience, if you live an authentic life, if you live the truth, which is what Catholics are called to do, other people like it. It smells good, looks good, smells good. It's attractive. We like people who live the truth. All Catholics can do, all Christians can do, is live the truth. Other people will come because there aren't many people doing it.
Yeah, I like that. Now, Holly in the chat has asked, does Gavin think that King Charles is a traitor?
Yes.
That's a good straight answer. And what's your reasoning?
Well, he was brought up by Lawrence van der Post. He's a Jungian. I spent 20 years as a convinced Jungian. I know what they think and why they think it. He's a relativist. There were two ways of saving the monarchy. Was the direction he's gone in. The other one was to be true to its calling as defender of the faith and Christian culture. he's given up on that. That's why he's a traitor.
Yeah.
Does he see it? No, I think he's a bit like Welby. I don't think he's very bright. I think he's, we could say he's badly advised. I'm really sorry. I don't think the monarchy's got more than a few years left because it's tried to please the very people who don't care to support it. It's given up on the few people who might die for it, who give themselves for it. And it's tried to placate the very people who just don't give a toss. It's a stupid thing to do. It'd be really, really, really silly to throw it away so cheaply. And I'm afraid he's in the middle of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's also on top of that. He's very much a globalist. He's aligned with an agenda which seems to go in a long line with the World Economic Forum. And they, of course, I believe they want to destroy the religions and they want to unite them under a banner that they can then control, which appears to me to be communistic in its approach. And so one last question, a spicy one that's very topical at the moment. From Dark Commission again, he's asked, what do you think of Christian Zionists?
Oh gosh, that's quite tricky, isn't it? I'm very pro-Jewish. I'm very pro-Israel as a concept. If we define Zionism as religion-free political Israeliness, I'm not in favor of it. I don't think that the Jews have any excuse to be religion free. I do think they have every right to live in their homeland, and there'd be peace tomorrow if Islam would give up trying to destroy them, as it has done consistently for 1,500 years. So I don't agree with Zionism. I think it's probably the dark side of Judaism, but I do think that the Jews are entitled to live at peace.
And there you go. That, my friend, is a very long conversation for another
Isn't
day.
It just?
Yeah, a very long conversation indeed. With there'll be a lot of hair pulling out. There'll be a lot of hair pulling of each other. Maybe, who knows?
Okay.
But can I
just say very briefly, for those people who think I'm talking rubbish and it's dangerous, please look up Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro has done a number of 10-minute videos giving the facts and the history of the last 50 years. It's so important. Most of the people who hate what I say don't know their history. I don't mind them hating me or hating what I say, but they need to learn their history. Ben Shapiro will give it to you in 10 minutes.
I agree with you that people need to know their history. I've actually done a video part debunking Ben Shapiro's claims, going back into history. Yeah, into even further in history than Ben Shapiro. And I can tell you one little note I'll say just before we end this is that the Palestinian people are genetically 50 to 80% similar to that of ancient Canaanites who have inhabited the land for 11,000 to 15,000 years, predating the original states of Israel. So I think that is a very, and what should also be noted is the majority of Jews who live in Israel are 50 to 60% genetically similar to the same ancient Canaanites. So I think that
you're right. I'm sure you're right about that. It's a very, very interesting point. But we could simply boil it down and saying that on the whole, they're all Semites, and ideally they ought to be able to share the land.
I agree with people sharing peacefully. I do. And I hope that one day that can happen. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of bad blood, we could say. But Dr. Gavin Ashenden, thank you so much for coming on, being so open, being so willing to answer some very awkward questions. And I hope you'll come on again and we can have we can pull each other's hair out then, all right?
I'd love to. And as confessors say in the Catholic Church when they leave the confessional, pray for me, a sinner.
I will do. You're listening